Just so I understand who's in the audience, how many of you have already started up a business? And how many of you have reached revenues at this point? Wow, okay, that's great. I'm going to give you a brief overview. Elias already gave you a little bit of an overview of my story, but I want to talk a little bit about the pivot points in my history. And then I'll go through some steps that I think are critical components to building a startup, and then end with entrepreneurship in Greece. So my story is I started on Wall Street and had a finance background there. And I felt that if I understood finance, I knew everything I needed to know about a business. It was sort of a typical arrogant Wall Street attitude. And when I went to work at Thermoelectron, which is a high technology conglomerate in Boston, I realized that when you're looking at technology businesses, understanding the finances is a very minor part of the picture. You really need to understand the technology. And I had only studied math and music at Brown. You didn't need to study anything you weren't interested in. So I realized that I had this gaping hole in my background that I needed to fill. So that's when I went to MIT and got my master's in mechanical engineering. And then now I felt like, okay, I've got the understanding of business, I've got my technology, now I'm ready to go. All I need is some management experience. And I tried to get a job as a manager, but nobody would give me a job because I didn't have management experience. And I thought, how am I supposed to get management experience unless you give me some experience? So it was sort of frustrating, and I ended up spending a year looking for a failing business to turn around. I decided I would take matters into my own hand. So I looked for a failing business to turn around, and I saw a lot of businesses, hundreds of businesses, with no product differentiation. So they were stuck competing on price. And it's very hard to do anything about that. That's not a winning proposition. So after this year, I felt like, wow, I had nothing to show for all my work and effort over an entire year after having gotten my master's degree. So I went back to my thesis advisor at MIT and asked him for some advice. And he led me to the technology licensing office at MIT. And that was unbelievable, because all of a sudden there were a dozen technologies that they were looking for people to commercialize, all of which had tremendous product differentiation. So it was really exciting. I saw some great new technologies. One of them was in 3D printing, and this is back in 1994, before the term 3D printing even existed. So that was a major pivot in my career. I ended up founding Z Corporation back in 1994. I was the CEO and built the business to about 30 million in revenues, very profitable. And we ultimately sold in 2005. I was tired, I needed a break. And since that time, I've been an investor and a director and a mentor to entrepreneurs. So this is a 3D printed part made on our machine, and that's what our machine looks like. So the first step in starting a business is defining the market, and what that requires is that there's a problem that you're solving. And it can't just be solving the problem in a way that's a little more ingenious or a little more interesting from a technical perspective. You really need to be doing something that is quantifiably better, faster, or cheaper than any other solution. Because the problem is, at the end of the day, all customers care about is, can you deliver what I'm looking for, a solution, affordably? So that involves having significant product differentiation. You don't want to be competing on price. One thing you can do in Greece is there are a tremendous number of ideas that have been successfully proven elsewhere in the world that don't yet exist in Greece. Greece is such a small market that large companies won't necessarily invest in Greece. And these are proven ideas, and so you can just copy them and implement them here. Looking at niche markets is something that's very interesting for a startup. You can grow from there, but a niche often will provide you an opportunity to get some low-hanging fruit, because it might be a small enough market that is not interesting to a large player, but big enough to build a small company around and to grow. And then from there, you can expand and go into other areas. So it's important to see how big the market is, so it's big enough. But that's okay if it's too niche for the big players, and sometimes that's good. One hurdle we had at Z Corporation is we were creating a market that did not exist at that time. People didn't know what 3D printing was. You know, when I would call people on the phone, they had no idea what I was talking about. And it's really challenging to create a new market. You think that just because you have some great new invention, that everybody's going to come running because it's so cool. And they do. At trade show booths, our booth would be packed full. People thought it was so amazing to be able to build a physical model from the data. But at the end of the day, there's a big difference between people being dazzled and people actually being willing to give you money. And that disconnect is very important. So one thing we found is that competition can be very good. When we started, we had no competition, but two of the large players in the high end of the market ended up competing with us on the low end. And that actually helped us tremendously because they spent a lot of marketing dollars educating the customer and really building awareness in the marketplace that this technology existed. And so that actually benefited us to a great degree. One thing I would also encourage is there's a tremendous focus on consumer businesses today, and that tends to be what people think of when they don't have a good idea. But I would encourage you all to also think about business-to-business concepts. The next is validating the market, and if you're selling to a business, validating the market means reducing it to numbers. It means building a value proposition that you can prove to the customer that you will increase their revenues and or reduce their costs. And you have to be able to deliver numbers to prove to them that that's the case. The best way to do this is before you even have a product, try to sell the product. So either make a drawing of it, build a prototype, do something so you can convey to your customers what it is that you want to do, and try to sell them on it. Try to actually get them to prepay for the product before you have the product. This is really challenging, but I encourage you to do it because the feedback that you get from these customers is invaluable to you in developing the product. The worst thing you can do is live in your little vacuum, not talk to customers, and develop a product that nobody cares about. That you could have tweaked things, you could have changed the development such that it would have had great value to the end user. And the last thing I'll say is entrepreneurs are always worried about people stealing their ideas. Don't worry about that. Nobody cares. You're going to have trouble getting anyone to listen to your ideas. Don't worry about anyone stealing it. There's so much more to building a business than just your idea. You think your idea is the greatest thing. It may be. But what will make your company successful is not just the great idea. It's all the work that will go into building a business. So you have much more to gain by getting feedback from people than you have to lose by spreading your idea. For making a business plan, before you do anything, just take out a little scrap of paper, a napkin, and write down some basic numbers, which is, how much do you think you'll sell the product for? How many units do you have to sell to build a scalable business? Because a lot of ideas sound sort of fun and interesting, but then you look at the numbers, oh my God, can I actually get 10 million people to subscribe to this thing? That's probably not likely. And then look at the costs. How many people do I have to hire to make that viable? What are going to be the cost of goods of this product? Can I get a good enough gross margin to make it work? The one surprise that you'll find is that the development, the manufacturing, the selling, and the marketing will cost much more money and take much longer than you ever anticipate. And you have to build that in. You have to allow for that. When you're fundraising, make sure you allow for that fact. It's always surprising, and especially the more innovative you are, the longer that takes. And for that reason, pricing is absolutely critical. I'll give you a story from Z Corp. Our vision, at the time that we started Z Corp, the market for 3D printing was equipment. At that time, it was called rapid prototyping. And the equipment sold for $100,000 to $1 million. And we said, we're going to come out with something on the really low end. We're going to sell 3D printers for $20,000 that you can put in your office next to your desk and build models really quickly. And we thought that was really exciting. And we talked about this for a year, and we had it all under development, and everything was going great. And then we attended the big design trade show, and the two competitors on the high end of the market announced products on the low end. That basically, they were going after the market that we had set ourselves to go after. And we thought, oh my God, this is the end of the world. Maybe we should just call it quits. But we went and we talked to the competitors about what they had. And what we discovered was that our technology was 10 times faster than their technology and 10 times cheaper in terms of making a model. So we realized that we had something that was better than what was out there. And it turns out they were pricing their product at $60,000, not at $20,000, which is where we were going to price ours. And so right before we launched our product, we said, you know what? You can always lower your price. You can't raise your price. So let's try selling at $60,000. That's where they are. We're faster. We should be able to do that. Let's try that. And then we can always lower it later. Maybe in a couple months we'll lower it. So we did. We set the price at $60,000, and we kept that price. To this day, we have a product at that price point. So this is however many years later. So if we had not done that, we didn't recognize. As I say, everyone was mesmerized by our technology. It's an amazing technology. But actually getting people to pay for it was totally different. The engineering managers needed approvals. Everybody thought this was a gimmick that the engineers just wanted, like a toy. And so we found our sales cycle was like a year. It took us much longer to sell than we anticipated. Had we not priced at $60,000, we would have gone out of business. So that was one of those critical strategic decisions. Thank God that our competitors came out and that we decided to price at that high point. Just don't ever forget that. Price it much higher than you think, and then you can always lower it later. And focus on profitability. Businesses fail for one reason. They run out of cash. And it doesn't matter how great your product is. It doesn't matter how huge the market opportunity is. At the end of the day, if you run out of cash, it doesn't matter. If you're not around to exploit the opportunity, it doesn't matter. So you got to always keep your eye on the cash. Building a team is a really important piece of the puzzle. And a team is not just a group of individuals. A team is like you think about it on the soccer field. Everybody's got their role. Everybody supports each other. And a big piece of that, and I'll be honest, this was a challenge for me personally, is empowering people, delegating authority, and supporting and nurturing your employees, putting decision-making at the lowest possible level, because the people that are closest to the ground have the most information. And people want responsibility, they want authority, and that's the best way to get things done. The other thing is, we were all a bunch of MIT engineers, and you can imagine, you probably know a lot of them. There are some really interesting people, and they have tremendous greatness in some dimensions, and they might have gaping holes in other dimensions. I mean, you may not want to be able to take them to a business meeting, but they are like the most brilliant programmer you've ever met in your life. And we had some really odd characters in our company. And at the beginning, I got very frustrated with them. Like, why can't I get you to submit a report? Why can't I get you to, fill in this spreadsheet or do your POs correctly? And I would get very frustrated. And it took me a while to realize, like, this guy is a gem. He's 1 in a million in material science. So the fact that there's powder all over our office and it's all over my clothes and I get home and I have to take a shower, that's okay because he's extraordinary. And so what we learned how to do was to fill in the holes that were not being met by some of these engineers. The other is to set up founders' equity early on. So often entrepreneurs get together with their buddy from university and say, let's start a business, bring in a few friends, we'll start it up, you do this, you do that, and everything's going great. And then suddenly you have to start a company, and everyone has had different expectations. Well, I thought I was going to own half the company. What? And suddenly nothing has been put on paper. Nobody has any idea what the expectations are. Wait, I thought I was going to be CEO. You want to be CEO? So it's really important right from day one to define everything, to really sit down, get a lawyer, and say, even if you're not ready to pay for the lawyer, just write it on a sheet of paper. Like, I'm going to own half, you're going to own for half, and then when we raise money, it'll dilute us both, whatever, so that there's no confusion later, because there can be a lot of bad blood later on if you haven't defined these things. The other is to leverage your network. As Greeks, you all have amazing networks, and you're great at using them. But the one thing I would caution is, don't hire someone you can't fire. Don't bring on your yaya to do sales and marketing. Don't bring on your cousin and your best friend and your husband. That's really dangerous. It's going to ruin your relationship. It's going to ruin your business. It'll probably ruin both. So I highly encourage you not to do that. And just use your professional network, because that can be a rich source. And these are people that you can fire if you have to, and everyone can move on. I encourage you to have a hiring philosophy. So our philosophy was to hire young people who had a lot of fire and spunk and who had been successful at doing whatever they had done before then, but perhaps lacked any direct experience to what we were asking them to do. This allowed us to bring on people. We couldn't really afford to pay people, and so it allowed us to bring on people that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. And it really worked for us. The one caution I have is that some employees are okay. They're not horrendous. They're not causing big problems, but they're not superstars. And these are the ones who are really dangerous, because you kind of put your head in the sand. Well, they're okay. They work hard. They're nice people. I can't really let them go. What would I say? And the problem is there's a huge opportunity cost in having people that are not stellar. If you only have 5 employees, if one of them is not stellar, you're not achieving the potential that you could. And at the end of the day, we all make mistakes. You have to understand that. Admit them, deal with them, let people go, and move on. And trust me, you're not doing them a favor by keeping them on in a role that they're not good at. They don't like it, they're not happy, they need to find their way, and you have a responsibility to the business to do what's right for the business. The first thing I would recommend is getting a mentor who's had some success in building a business. And once you get that mentor, and make sure it's a mentor who's willing to tell you what you don't want to hear. And then you need to build a board of directors, and I recommend doing that pretty early on, but early on, just make a small board. You may just want a couple of people, because once you bring somebody onto your board, it's very hard to remove them. And over time, you're going to want to add more people to the board as you find people who have great experience, or as you identify new areas of expertise that you want. So it might be fundraising, it might be an industry expert, whatever. You're going to want to grow the board over time, and it's very unwieldy to have a huge board. So, but it's very good discipline to have a quarterly board meeting where you report your results, you're held accountable, you report on milestones that you hope to achieve and the milestones that you have achieved. And then always allow for some unstructured time at the end of the meeting to get feedback from the board, to have an open discussion, and to pose some questions to the board. And listen to what they have to say. If you're not listening, you're not getting any value from your board. At Z Corp, very often we walked into a board meeting, and we walked out of the board meeting a few hours later, walking in a very completely different direction than when we had walked in. And it was because our board convinced us that we needed to do something different. So we got tremendous value. We were not trying to sell our board on anything. We had the nice luxury that the fundraising was relatively easy, and we sort of controlled our destiny. So we were never trying to sell the board. We were very honest. When things went badly, when we had a mistake, when we had a failure, we told our board about it, and we got feedback from the board. And that's really important. If you can't be honest to your board, then you're not going to get useful feedback from them. Funding. Keep it simple. The one thing that I see when I see pitches is that entrepreneurs will talk on and on and on about how big the market is, how great it is, this and that, all about what they have, but they don't start out by saying, what is it? What is the product? What is the service? Show me. Do you have a picture? If it's a physical product, show me a picture of what it is, or hand it to me. Or if it's software, show me a screenshot of what it looks like so I can understand. The number one thing that investors are looking for is people. So they're looking at the team, they're assessing the team. Because at the end of the day, as I talked to you about my career, I had to make many pivots. And you as an entrepreneur are going to have to pivot many times during the course. You're going to have to make course corrections as you get more information from the market. We understand that. And so that's okay. And so we want to know that you're going to be able to do that, that you're capable, you're strong, you're able to make decisions and take feedback and change direction. One thing I would encourage when you're looking for investors is to find investors in related businesses, because they may have built up some domain expertise that they can use toward your business. When you're looking for investors, obviously you're going to look at venture capital. That would probably be your number one. But also consider angel investment. If it's the kind of a business that's not going to need more than $2 or $3 million to get to profitability, you're much better off with an angel investment. If it's going to need $10 to $15 million, you might as well go with a VC from the beginning. But then there are other options. So your customers. We had one of our customers invest $500,000 in Z Corp in its early days. Distributors. We had one of our distributors invest $1 million. Customers and distributors make amazing investors. They don't ask for anything. Once a year, I would email a report, never heard back from them, no questions, no board seats, no conflict. It was great. That's the kind of investor you want. And then there are strategic investors. So these are companies that have a vested interest in your success. And these are great investors to have as well, but I would caution you because a strategic investor is typically interested in ultimately acquiring you if you're successful, and that's great because you have a nice exit. The downside of it is that it then repels other exits from competitors to that strategic investor. So there's something to be gained and something to be lost, so you just have to be a little cautious. And when you're fundraising, the big decision that you're going to be making is there's always this balance between how fast are you going to grow and generate higher value versus how quickly can I get to profitability, which has lower risk and less dilution. And so now all of you equity holders in the business will own more of a smaller pie. And so it really depends. There's no answer to this. It depends on your business, and it depends on what kind of a return you can generate on your incremental investment. And this is something you should rethink all the time. So even if you get to profitability, for example, we got to profitability quite early in our history, but we still always struggled with this decision because we said, maybe we shouldn't be profitable. Maybe we should invest more money in the business, try to grow faster, and thereby create more value. And there's no clear-cut answer to that, and that's something that we struggled with, and you need to keep rethinking that as you get more information. Culture is very important, and you as a founder of a business set the culture of your company, and this lives on for even after you've gone. And these are things like integrity. That means being honest, scrappiness. Are you willing to double up when you travel in hotel rooms? Having a healthy debate. At Z Corp, we had a very adversarial culture in a very healthy way. So people argued, and no matter what level you were at, your opinion was encouraged. And that was great. We got a lot of value from that because everybody was always arguing, their own opinions. The important part of that is that there were clear roles and responsibilities so that at the end of the day, everyone knew whose decision it was. And so there was no question about that. We also had a little bit of a clash between the corporate versus academic. And that took some working out. Strive for excellence, but don't strive for perfection because the cost is too high. You need to move on. You need to get information, build your product, get it out there and move on. Negative personalities can poison your culture, so you need to deal with that. It can't be acceptable. Failure is information. Failure is a part of this process. If you can't deal with failure, go work in a big company. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to embrace failure. And I know that's difficult, but that's a really important piece of it. And the last is have fun. You may be at this for a while. Forget about this thing you're going to exit next year. It's not happening. You're going to be at this for a while. Could be 5 years, could be 10 years, could be longer. So you better have something that you have a passion for and enjoy it. Technology directions. The engineers want to go in a million different directions. You got to make sure you keep a focus and be ready to pivot when you get new information. Finally, I wanted to talk about entrepreneurship in Greece. Greeks are natural entrepreneurs, scrappy, assertive, and resilient. I encourage you to cooperate with each other, do things like today, network with each other, support each other. Your biggest hurdle is the environment that you're working in. So help each other out. Stop whining. The government will help you. Investors will come after you have shown that this is viable, that you can be successful. So just forget what's out of your control. Focus on what's in your control, which is a lot, and turn your weaknesses into strengths. Think bigger. Go to the university and commercialize an invention. What are the problems you see in the world that could be solved by innovation? What problems already exist outside of Greece that you could do here? This is really hard. What you are embarking on is very hard. This is not a time for balance in your life, and that sort of is what it is, and embrace it. As I say, failure is an inherent part of the process. Enjoy the process, celebrate your milestones, and if you persevere, you have an opportunity to be a part of a pivotal moment in Greece's history. When I look at what's happening today, I'm so excited. The economy is just starting to turn around, and what has made life so difficult for you here in Greece, this very high unemployment rate, is actually a tremendously fertile backdrop for creating entrepreneurship. You're going to be able to hire people. When we were at Z Corp back in the 90s, hiring a software engineer was impossible, literally impossible. There were no software engineers in Boston to be hired. They were so expensive. It was completely out of our reach. But you can start something up, and you've got this talent pool, this rich talent pool that's available. So use that. This generation can change Greece's trajectory, and in 10 years, you can be this burgeoning startup economy like what we've seen in Israel. Controlling your own destiny is incredibly enriching, incredibly fulfilling. It's hard work, but it's really fun, and I think you'll all enjoy it. So I wish you luck in your adventure. I would love to hear from you and see what kind of startups you're thinking about. And network amongst yourselves. Make sure you're all helping each other out. Thank you very much.